So it's the weekend and I got a video request from one of my subscribers and I don't have the email in front of me, so I won't read it out verbatim. But it said something to the effect of, BG, have you seen the recent Deontay Wilder suggestions that Anthony Joshua is David Price Mark II? Could you do a video discussing your take on this? So I thought it was potentially an interesting topic to discuss, and it's something that I've considered once or twice before myself, so I wanted to kind of look at this and potentially discuss from both sides. First things first, I can see why Deontay Wilder has made the suggestion that Anthony Joshua is David Price Mark II. That's not to necessarily suggest that I agree with the statement, but there are certainly similarities there, let's be honest. Two British fighters, hyped to the max, two guys who are Olympians, two guys who are very, very tall, upright fighters who rely very, very extensively on their immense power and, you know, have blasted out their opponents in the main. Yet two guys who have maybe fought a questionable level of opposition. Now, David Price, I know a lot of Anthony Joshua fans are maybe newer to boxing, but David Price, God, it must be 5, 6, 7 years ago now, when he was coming up through the professional ranks under the then Frank Maloney, he was the darling of the casual fans. You know, there were all sorts of casual fans on Twitter, on Facebook, whatever, saying that this guy was going to be the guy to unify the heavyweight division, to smash Klitschko out of the park, to be the next Lennox Lewis, etc. And he was on a very, very impressive knockout streak. But then he stood up, he fought at, I guess what you could say is top 20 level against Tony Thompson, and as you guys know, he got beat. Then he rematched Tony Thompson, and as you guys know, he got beat again. And his career, it's fair to say, has never really recovered off the back of that. He's fought a succession of subpar opponents who he's beaten, and then both times he's moved back up to top 20 level. Contepa, Christian Hamer, he's been defeated by stoppage. So the suggestion from Deontay Wilder is that Anthony Joshua could potentially fit the same mould. A guy with extensive power, extensive backing, extensive hype, a guy who is running through his opponents left, right and centre, but a guy who arguably is yet to face a truly elite opponent, and you know, potentially could be found out as and when he does, which will obviously be Vladimir Klitschko in April. I guess one of the other similarities between the two guys is, you know, when David Price was coming up, there were whispers amongst the boxing hardcore that the guy had a chin issue. There were, you know, we'd seen him hurt in the amateurs, and there were whispers of various things that he may be a bit glassy around the chin. And let's put it that way, those same whispers, rumours, whatever you want to call them, are present with Anthony Joshua right now, aren't there? You know, like David Price, we've seen Joshua hurt in the amateurs. Like David Price, Joshua perhaps isn't the most natural when he's under fire and when, you know, the pressure's on him. Like David Price, there are rumours of, you know, Joshua being hurt in sparring. I guess most notably, the rumour is that David Price himself knocked out Anthony Joshua in sparring, which I think has been all but confirmed. You know, other rumours in addition to that, I think, you know, Olympians, amateur fighters knocking Joshua out, etc. So, yeah, all sorts of suggestions that there may be a similarity between the two, and in this video I want to discuss that, really. Let me start by saying, I believe Anthony Joshua is a superior fighter than David Price ever was. And I think it's fair to say ever was, because David Price now is not the same fighter he was 5 or 6 years ago. If you re-watch David Price when he was coming up, he was actually nowhere near as bad as he is now. I think the psychological damage that those defeats have done to David Price have seen him become massively tentative, have seen him become very laboured in the ring. If you actually watch David Price prior to those defeats, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he was Muhammad Ali in there, but he was putting punches together much more effectively. He was more aggressive, and there was a bit more flow and a bit less fear to his work than we see now. But let's have it right. Peak David Price, whatever you determine peak David Price to be, is not the same fighter that Anthony Joshua is. We'll start by looking at resume. Now, I know Joshua hasn't fought an elite opponent, and I'm not going to sit here and suggest that Joshua's beat the who's who of heavyweight boxing. But let's have it right. Joshua's beaten a far better list of opponents than David Price. Dillian White, Charles Martin, Eric Molina, Dominic Breazeale. I'd have all of those as top 30 heavyweights right now. And I think some of them were certainly in the top 20 when Joshua fought them. It's probably an argument that Charles Martin was in the top 10 when Joshua fought him. And, you know, I wouldn't pick David Price to beat those guys. Dillian White, certainly, I'd pick to beat David Price. Eric Molina, David Price, I'd see as a 50-50 fight, you know. David Price's best wins of his career: Sam Sexton, Audley Harrison. You know, he's really been operating at that English-British level in terms of the best wins of his career. You know, guys like Christian Hamer, guys like Tony Thompson, who've got the defeat who've defeated him. Let's have it right. I'd pick Joshua to beat those guys, and to beat those guys in decent order, if I'm honest. So from a resume perspective, I would suggest Joshua has already surpassed David Price. Clearly, Joshua holds a version of the world title, which is above and beyond what David Price ever achieved. But I also think in the ring, Joshua is a far better fighter than David Price. I believe, first and foremost, he's a superior athlete. I think he moves better. I think he's more dynamic and puts punches together more fluently and in a cleaner fashion. I also believe technically he's a superior boxer to David Price. His jab is far, far better than David Price's. I think the way he cuts down the ring on opponents, the way he stalks, the way he looks to counter, you know, is far more elite than anything I've seen from David Price from a technical perspective. What is interesting is the weaknesses to Joshua are relatively unknown still, because let's be frank, he hasn't actually really been tested in his professional career. We've never seen the Anthony Joshua fight where he's taken multiple punches or where he's gone 12 rounds. But the potential weaknesses in Joshua's game mirror the established weaknesses in David Price's game. So for me, if we look at Joshua's areas of doubt, area of doubt one, chin. All these sparring rumours, you know, etc. We haven't really seen him take too many clean punches in the pros. What's his chin like? We saw him take a notable punch from Dillian White, and he was a bit rocked, you know, which happens in heavyweight boxing. But, you know, chin against an elite puncher such as a Vladimir Klitschko is clearly a key potential weakness for Joshua, as it is with all unproven fighters, to be fair to him. But that mirrors David Price, who, as we know, has a chin concern. David Price falls to pieces when someone gets inside the pocket and puts him on his back foot and takes away his range. Again, we're yet to kind of see anyone test Joshua in that sense. I mean, the second round of that Dillian White fight, where Dillian kind of dug him to the body a bit and, you know, pushed him back a bit, Joshua didn't look too fluent at that stage. So again, there's a bit of a doubt there. Stamina, you know, we know David Price's stamina is fairly terrible, or certainly has been in several of his major fights. And again, with Joshua hasn't necessarily shown us stamina concerns, but he's yet to go into the championship rounds, and he's yet to be in a fight where it's truly been a competitive fight. You know, it's quite easy to fight for 8-9 rounds when a fight is very, very one-sided. It's quite hard to fight for 8-9 rounds where a fight is a more even matchup, as we saw in David Price, Christian Hamer. So for me, concerns over Joshua's stamina do remain somewhat when we look at the size and the build of Joshua. You know, that's a lot of muscle mass to carry around for a 12-round fight. I think defensively with Joshua as well, again, it's one of those things where it's crazy that Joshua is considered by some as the #1 heavyweight in the world. Yet we haven't even really seen him tested defensively, because we're yet to see him in with an opponent who's had the ambition and the capability to put him under sustained attack. So a lot of the defensive questions from Anthony Joshua relate to that Dillian Whyte fight, or relate to the amateur footage that we've seen of him. But I've always thought he isn't the most natural when under fire. You know, I've always thought he was potentially a bit stiff, a bit robotic, and not the most instinctive when the bullets were flying and when, you know, someone was pouring it on him. So, interesting. I think what I'm getting at is the weaknesses that potentially exist within Joshua's game that will potentially be exposed by Vladimir Klitschko are actually the same weaknesses that exist in his game, that exist in David Price's game. You know, I think there's a lot of crossover in terms of Joshua's potential weaknesses and David Price's established weaknesses. But the truth is, for me, even if Joshua goes out and gets chinned in one round by Vladimir Klitschko, I believe he's a far superior fighter to David Price. I believe his resume is already far superior, and I believe his capability, both athletically and in terms of his technique, is far superior to David Price. And if Joshua were to lose against Vladimir Klitschko, let's be real and say that is a far higher level than the level that David Price has been losing at. You know, Joshua won't be losing to Christian Hamer anytime soon, as far as I'm concerned. I just think he's a far superior fighter. So, is Anthony Joshua David Price Mark II? Well, there are similarities. I believe Joshua's superior to David Price, but Joshua's in a very unique position where he is a world champion who's had 1 or 2 defences of his title now, who's completely untested. And he's untested in the areas that David Price has failed his test. You know, Joshua's stamina is untested. Joshua's defence is untested. Joshua's chin is untested. Joshua's back foot game is untested. Joshua's inside game is untested. It's not a bad thing to be untested, because it may be that Joshua has an iron chin. It's just we don't know yet, because he hasn't taken those punches, and it's probably a good thing that he hasn't taken those punches. You know, that's credit to him for not having taken that. So, is Joshua David Price Mark II? I don't think we're going to find out till he's been in more notable fights. And clearly, he is in a very notable fight against Vladimir Klitschko, which may well give us the answer to some of these questions. If Joshua goes 12 rounds with Klitschko, the stamina's answered, the defence is answered, the chin is answered. You know, all of these things can be answered. Right now, if he were to lose, I still think he's well above and beyond David Price. And, you know, I suspect that he can come again. But it's an interesting point. And I think some of the similarities and some of the potential areas of weakness means that Deontay Wilder isn't far wrong to compare the two. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens when Joshua steps into the ring with Vladimir Klitschko. Of course, we are going to cover it very extensively on this channel. We'll be doing keys to victory videos, tactic victory videos, weigh-in videos, final prediction videos. So, you know, if you want to hear more about that, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can check out my other stuff. And if you're new to the channel, you know, please make sure you subscribe so we can grow the numbers out. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button. Do leave your comments in the section below. Fascinated to hear your thoughts on this. Could Anthony Joshua be David Price Mark II? Do you believe, like me, he's already far surpassed David Price? Yeah, just let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching, guys.